We all love Bridgerton. The drama, the romance, the Duke of Hastings with that spoon. You know the scene I'm talking about. But here's what the show doesn't tell you while you're swooning over these perfect love stories. Before Simon could even look at Daphne, someone was calculating exactly how much she was worth in pounds and property. Before Kate and Anthony had their enemies to lovers moment, lawyers were drawing up contracts that would control Kate's entire financial future. Before Penelope revealed herself as Lady Whistledown, she was considered damaged goods on the marriage market. And we're about to find out why. Because in the real Regency era, marriage wasn't about finding your soulmate. It was the biggest financial transaction most families would ever make. And the women? They were the product being sold. So buckle up, because today we're pulling back the curtain on Bridgerton's most beautiful lie. We're diving into dowries, settlements, and the cold, hard cash that made the marriage market work. And trust me, once you know the truth, you'll never watch the show the same way again. Let's start with everyone's favourite season 1 couple, Daphne and Simon. Remember how their romance played out? Fake courtship, real feelings, steamy scenes in the rain, happily ever after. Beautiful, right? But here's what Bridgerton conveniently forgot to mention. Before Daphne could marry anyone, let alone a duke, her family had to come up with a dowry. And we're not talking about a symbolic gift. We're talking about a massive financial package. In the real Regency era, a woman like Daphne Bridgerton, daughter of a viscount, well-connected from a respected family, would need a dowry of at least £10,000 to marry someone of the Duke's status. That's the equivalent of nearly $2 million today. And that money? It didn't go to Daphne. It went straight to Simon. The moment they got married, her dowry became his property to do with as he pleased. Why Bridgerton skipped this part? Well, the show makes it seem like Daphne and Simon fell in love and just got married. Like the only obstacle was their feelings. But in reality, there would have been months of negotiations between the Bridgerton family and the Duke's estate managers. And Daphne would not have been part of those conversations. Her mother? Maybe. Her brothers? Definitely. But Daphne herself? She'd be sitting in another room, waiting to find out what the men decided her future would look like. The show gives us girl power Daphne, who makes her own choices. Reality gave us Daphne the bargaining chip. Now let's talk about the Featherington family, because this is where Bridgerton actually gets close to the brutal truth. Remember in season 1 when Lord Featherington lost all the family money in bad investments? And suddenly Prudence, Philippa and Penelope were in a panic because they couldn't afford proper dowries. That is the most realistic part of the entire show, because without dowries, those girls were done. They were off the market. No respectable man would even consider them. And Lady Featherington's desperation, her scheming to find them any match, even inappropriate ones, that wasn't just a funny plotline. That was real. That was what mothers actually had to do when their daughters didn't have the money to compete. Also, let's talk about Penelope specifically. The show portrays her as overlooked and underestimated, and she is. But you want to know the real reason why no one was courting her in the early seasons? It wasn't just because she wore unflattering dresses. It was because everyone knew the Featheringtons were broke. In the real Regency era, gossip about a family's financial troubles spread fast. The Ton would know within days if a family couldn't provide adequate dowries. And once that information was out, those daughters became untouchable. So when Colin finally fell for Penelope in season 3, it wasn't just a sweet love story. It was him choosing her despite the fact that, financially speaking, she brought almost nothing to the marriage, which in the real world would have been absolutely scandalous. You're probably asking yourself, what happened to poor girls in real life? What happened to real Featherington sisters? girls who lost their dowries and couldn't find husbands. They became governesses. They moved in with relatives and lived as unpaid help. They faded into obscurity. Some of them never married and spent their entire lives financially dependent on brothers or cousins who resented supporting them. There was no Lady Whistledown reveal that saved them. There was no heroic Colin swooping in. There was just nothing. Season 2 gave us Kate and Anthony, and I'm not going to lie, their chemistry was unmatched. But let's talk about what happened after they decided to get married. In Bridgerton, Kate and Anthony have that big emotional conversation where they confess their feelings, and then boom, they're getting married. Simple, right? Wrong. In reality, the moment Anthony proposed, lawyers would have started drawing up the marriage settlement. This was a legally binding contract that determined everything about Kate's financial future. How much money she'd get as a personal allowance, what would happen to her if Anthony died, whether she'd have any control over property, whether she could even keep her own jewellery. And here's the kicker. Kate would have had almost zero say in these negotiations. The marriage settlement would have been negotiated between Anthony, or his estate managers, and Lady Mary, or whoever was acting as Kate's guardian. Kate herself might have been consulted on minor details, but the major decisions? Made by men. So all those scenes where Kate is this fierce, independent woman who doesn't back down, love that energy. But the reality is that the moment she married Anthony, the law said she basically ceased to exist as a legal person. There's a legal doctrine called coverture, and it's the most messed up thing you'll learn today. Under coverture, a married woman had no legal identity separate from her husband. She couldn't own property. She couldn't sign contracts. She couldn't even keep her own wages if she worked. Everything she owned became his the second they said, "I do." So when Kate married Anthony, all that fierce independence, legally speaking, it disappeared. In the eyes of the law, she was now just an extension of her husband. Yeah, not quite as romantic as the show makes it seem, is it? Let's talk about the London season. Bridgerton makes it look like this glamorous romantic social event where everyone's just having a great time dancing and falling in love. But let me tell you what it actually was. It was a battlefield. You know how every season the Queen picks a diamond, the most desirable debutante of the year? Daphne in season 1, Edwina in season 2. That actually happened. The Queen really did have her favourites. But here's what Bridgerton doesn't show you. If you weren't the diamond, if you were just a regular debutante, you were in a fight for your life. Because there were hundreds of young women entering the marriage market every season, but only a limited number of wealthy, titled men. The math was brutal. Not everyone was going to find a match, and the ones who didn't, they were socially destroyed. Here's a fun fact they don't mention in Bridgerton. If you didn't get engaged in your first season, people started to whisper. Second season, the whispers got louder. By your third season without a proposal, you were considered a failure and damaged goods. Think about Penelope in the early seasons. She's been out for years without a serious suitor. In the real Regency era, she would have been the subject of vicious gossip. People would assume something was wrong with her. Her reputation would be in tatters. And once your reputation was gone, so were your marriage prospects. Forever. Lady Bridgerton in the show is warm and supportive, right? She wants her children to be happy. She trusts them to make good choices. Real Regency mothers? Ruthless. They manage their daughters like CEOs managing a product launch. Every dress was strategic. Every dance card was carefully orchestrated. Every conversation was monitored. They would push their daughters toward the wealthiest prospects, cut off contact with unsuitable men, and do whatever it took to secure the best possible match. Because if their daughter didn't marry well, it wasn't just embarrassing, it was a financial disaster for the entire family. This wasn't about love. This was about survival. Okay, let's talk about our girl Eloise, because she represents something that Bridgerton wants to be true, but historically wasn't. Eloise spends the entire series saying she doesn't want to get married. She wants to be a writer. She wants independence. She wants to live life on her own terms. And we love that for her. We're all rooting for Eloise to break free from society's expectations. But here's the thing. In the real Regency era, Eloise wouldn't have had that choice. Let's say Eloise gets her wish and never marries. What would her life actually look like? Well, she couldn't live alone. That would be scandalous. She'd have to live with her family. First with her mother, then after her mother died, with whichever brother inherited the estate, probably Anthony. She'd have no income of her own unless her father left her a small inheritance, and even then, she couldn't control it herself. A male relative would manage it for her. Want to be a writer? Good luck. Women couldn't publish under their own names without facing social ruin. They had to use male pseudonyms. And even if they managed to get published, any money they made would legally belong to their male guardian. The independence Eloise wants? It didn't exist. Not for women of her class. The only respectable way for an unmarried gentlewoman to earn money was to become a governess. And let me tell you, that life was bland. Governesses were paid almost nothing. They lived in their employer's house but weren't treated as family. They were somewhere between a servant and a guest, belonging nowhere. They had no job security, no retirement plan, no social life, and they were vulnerable to abuse from their employers with basically zero legal recourse. So when Eloise says she'd rather be a spinster than marry someone she doesn't love, that's incredibly brave. But it's also incredibly naive about what spinsterhood actually meant. Because in the real Regency era, not marrying didn't mean freedom. It meant a lifetime of financial dependency and social invisibility. Okay, we need to talk about the only character in Bridgerton who actually understands how this system works. Lady Danbury. Lady Danbury is a widow, and in the Regency era, that meant she had something almost no other woman had: freedom. When her husband died, Lady Danbury inherited her jointure, the income that was set aside for her in her marriage settlement. And because she was no longer married, she was no longer under coverture. Suddenly, she could own property, sign contracts, control her own money, and most importantly, make her own decisions. For the first time in her adult life, she was legally a person. This is why Lady Danbury is so sharp about the marriage market. She's been through it. She knows exactly how it works. And she knows that if she remarries, she loses everything. Because the moment she says "I do" to a new husband, all her property would become his. Her independence would vanish, and she'd be right back under coverture, legally invisible again. So she stays single and enjoys her wealth. She manipulates the marriage market from the sidelines because she understands it better than anyone. And that is why she's the only character in Bridgerton who feels historically accurate. But here's the dark reality of the Regency era. The only way for a woman to get the kind of freedom Lady Danbury has was to marry someone, wait for him to die, and hope he left her a good jointure. Think about that. The only path to independence was through marriage and widowhood. Women couldn't be free while they were married, and they couldn't be free without having been married. The system was designed to trap women either way. So here we are. We've pulled back the curtain on Bridgerton's most beautiful fantasy, that Regency-era marriage was about love and choice. But the reality? Daphne's romance was built on a dowry worth millions. Kate's independence disappeared the second she married Anthony. Penelope would have been considered unmarriageable without her Lady Whistledown fortune. Eloise's dream of staying single would have meant a lifetime of dependency. And the only woman with real power, Lady Danbury, had to wait for her husband to die to get it. Does that mean we should stop watching Bridgerton? Absolutely not. Because here's the thing. Bridgerton gives us something the real Regency era never could. A world where women aren't trapped by economics, where they do have choices, where love actually matters more than money. That's the fantasy, and it's a fantasy we need. But we also need to know the truth, because these systems didn't just disappear. Women didn't get full property rights in England until the 1880s, almost 70 years after the Regency era ended. Even then, the economic disadvantages persisted for generations. Understanding this history helps us appreciate how far we've come, but it also reminds us how fragile these rights are, how recently women gained financial independence, how many systems still exist to limit women's economic power. So go ahead, keep watching Bridgerton, keep shipping your favourite couples and enjoy the beautiful fantasy. Just remember, it's called historical fiction for a reason. And if this video completely changed how you see the show, do me a favour, smash that subscribe button, because next time we're revealing even more scandalous topics, and trust me, you're going to want to see that. Until then, keep questioning what you're watching, keep learning the real history, and keep demanding better for women, both past and present.